Hi, we are going to talk about some anthologies that I've been in during the past few years. I have two here. One's called Magic Portals, and the other is called Wishing Well, which were edited by Sam Knight. Magic portals should be obvious, some sort of magical portal. Now, fantasy is not one of my favorite genres, but I did write a story for this, and it's about a sorcerer who has to find what's lost. It was a very fun story to do because, in theory, magic didn't work in outer space. So it's a crossover between fantasy and science fiction. And I'm just going to read just a little bit here. "But, Your Majesty," Camera objected, "you asked the impossible." "Of course I do." The king yawned, barely covering his mouth with his pudgy hand. "That's why I hired you, and not that insipid whip who runs errands for me." A glare nailed this poor skinny man who kneeled at the monarch's feet, shackled in arm and leg bands. "I tried," the captive wailed. "Oh, shut up," the king ordered. He narrowed his red eyes and looked at Cameron. "That witch took my son and hid him. Your job is to find him." He waved his hand, indicating the audience was over. Cameron bowed out of the room, and two guards clad in loincloths with crossed leather over their muscular torsos closed the door behind him. He gazed uneasily at their scimitars, each held at the ready, and fled down the darkened hall. Once outside, he dared to take a deep breath. How in the solar system was he supposed to find the lost royal heir when his mother, a renowned healer, not a witch as the king had called her, could be anywhere from one of the colonies like Mars to the furthest minus colony on Titan? "I should never have accepted the commission," Cameron mumbled, knowing precisely why he'd been hired. He had a knack for finding the unfindable. No thanks to his heritage. His father had been a sorcerer, from a long line going back generations, and his mother a distant cousin to the missing queen. One problem. His mother had no idea where the queen had gone. He'd asked her when he'd gotten both the payment and the summons to appear at the royal court. No doubt the king knew Cameron wouldn't turn down the assignment. "She's always been a tricky one," his mother had told him. "Take care or you might vanish, as have all the others who have sought her." Not real encouraging. Still, he needed the silver, and a referral from the king would bolster his reputation. Not that he really needed it. Everyone came to him to find what had been lost. The next one's called Wishing Well, and here again is the Wishing Well thing. And the story in here that I have is called "I Want My Kittens Back." And yes, it is told from the viewpoint of a cat. Caddy had watched the humans drop things into the water place. The farmer's little girl had sacrificed her favorite ribbon, his wife the cheap ring he'd given her, and his son his favorite knife, and the farmer, well, he drowned Caddy's kittens. would have gotten her too if she hadn't hidden in the cornfield. She'd heard him yelling and his long blade slicing the dead stalks. The rains hadn't come, and he'd lost all his crops. From what Dog shared, the farmer was going to lease his son to the landowner for the next year and his daughter to serve as the pastor's maid. Payment would be food for him and his wife. Dog had vanished, as had the plow horse and the milking goat. The chickens still laid eggs, and every month one of them lost their life. Wife spent time pulling out their feathers and then cooking them for a fine meal. Caddy had stolen a piece more than once, careful not to be seen. Turning her head toward the house, she listened as Farmer bellowed and his wife wailed. The children were leaving in the morning. Caddy suspected they would never come home, just like her kittens hadn't when she'd gone hunting for a fat mouse. Their scent had stopped where she now stood. Darkness stared up at her. Her jaws opened, and she dropped the mouse head into the water. Faintly she heard a splash. I want my kittens back. She'd heard the humans tell the well what they wanted. It seemed silly to ask water for anything besides a drink. A loud slam alerted her farmer had come outside. Caddy dashed into the bushes, startling a rabbit. It ran. She chased until they reached the dark woods. Darting into a hole, it escaped her. Good thing she wasn't hungry, or else she would have been disappointed. Jumping up on a fallen log, she watched the house. Farmer paced along the path leading to the barn, his eyes raised above his head, his voice booming. Not having learned the human tongue beyond her name, she had no idea why he was so angry. Slamming fists against the thick door, he didn't stop until blood ran down his arms and he sank to the ground. Her tail swished from side to side. If she was larger, she would attack, using her claws to rip his back and any other part she could reach. Bad idea, a tiny voice said. She bounced like rabbit and hissed at the small creature hovering over a bright flower. Clear wings fluttered constantly, and the body was a snake, like from tiny feet to back legs. He'd kill you. The creature was not familiar to her, smelled like fire, and she hissed again. Stop that! Darting toward her, it hovered just out of reach of her claws. You should come with me. She took a long look at Farmer. He'd gotten to his feet and grabbed the fork he used for the hay. He'd killed many vipers with those pointed teeth. Come! The creature moved further into the woods. Or don't you want your kittens back? Her kittens. What did this flying reptile know of them? And it gets a lot more fun from there. Alright, the rest of them I'm going to be reading from were all edited by Carol Hightshoe at Will Singer Publications. This one's called Tales from the Front Lines to the Thin Blue Line. This was done as a charity anthology to help police dogs. And I wrote a fun little story in here called They're Smuggling What? And it is told from the dog's point of view. Give me just a second while I find the page. Smells. Unwashed humans. Stale air with a machine smell. Others I did not know. A hand rested on my head and a soothing voice spoke to me. I understood the words. I'd heard them before. It's okay. Gingerly I put my paw on the surface, surprised at how solid it was, and cold. My human Lisa laughed, warm fingers scratching behind my ear. My favorite spot. You'll get used to it. I walked beside her. I didn't know why the human stared at me. Surely I couldn't be the first dog, as recalled, they'd seen. A door swished open, and before me was an office, much like I'd seen before. Others in gray uniforms sitting at desks, the rich scent of their favorite drink tickling my nose. "Officer Jordan," a male voice called, motioning my companion in. "Come on, Sammy." The male frowned when I joined them, sitting down on the hard surface and waiting to see what new orders awaited us. "I didn't realize you had a canine partner." I sensed he didn't like me. Captain Griggs assured me he'd explained. With a shrug, the other replied, "I'm in charge around here. Been here since the station opened. I'm Mason Lance." Lisa nodded, her black ponytail bobbing at the motion. "Long time," she inclined her head. "Nice to meet you." 20 years, his eyes, the shade of trees, looked at me. "Our biggest problem here are domestic disputes and smuggling." Sounds like a nice change. I'm used to handling worse. Back on Earth, we'd been part of the homicide team. I hated the smell of blood and death. Surprised you, and that dog qualified for this pot. I passed all the tests, as did Sammy. She sounded offended. "Fine." He handed her a computer clip. "Your first assignment." "Thank you, sir. Your desk is in the corner." He turned to look out the window, filled with darkness and sparkling stars. Lisa had explained we'd be living in space. I watched with interest from the shuttle while we traveled here. I laid down and she put the clip on the computer and snorted. "Cats. Someone is smuggling cats." Yep, I know. That's a really strange thing to smuggle. Another one, which is a little bit older, is called Time Capsules. It's very short. There wasn't a lot of stories. We were basically given a list, like the idea of someone finding a time capsule, and asked to write a story about it. I don't remember what all was in mine, but I did write a story. And one thing I will tell you is that there are dinosaurs in this story. It's called Rightfully Theirs. "Where are the sacred objects?" he roared, his thunderous voice vibrating through the thick green trees, sending all of the other creatures into hiding. Except the sky dwellers who snapped their beaks, winging their way toward the distant ocean. No doubt they would hunt for swimmers. Good eating, they always bragged. The slow ones had long necks and tails, their thick bodies blending into the forest. Only paused in their gathering of leaves. Their mouths ripped branches and they munched happily. One of them caught a small two-legged runner and gobbled it down. Angry at not getting a reply, he pushed his way through the forest, alert and ready to hunt. Yes, he had to retrieve the objects left to him by those who came before. A sacred trust he dared not break. How dare the hunters take them from him and leave only their putrid scent behind? Despite the burning in his belly, he stomped on, crushing under his feet a spindly. The satisfying crunch oozed juices splattered between his talons. Had his errand not been so dire, he would have stalked and eaten it. Not that it would fill him, rather a tasty snack before the main course. On and on he trudged, his nose sniffing for any trace of the treasure he sought. How it had been stolen from his cave, or he'd kept all of value to him, he didn't know. Finding the objects in thick skin, much like his own, had told him the place was his. He roared again loudly, satisfied when several three-horns came out to challenge him. They snorted and huffed, daring him to trespass on what they considered theirs. Any other time of light, he would have indulged them. The urgency of his errand forced him to circle around them, ignoring their snorts. Maybe next time he'd take one of their young. That'd show them. Continuing his trek toward the destination, he avoided the long necks, the thick backs, and slapped away the tiny runners who tried to bite his legs. He managed to catch one, catching it in his sharp teeth, enjoying how it wiggled down his throat. The others ran away, terrified of suffering the same fate. On and on and on he ran, his heart pumping, his head swaying side to side, his nose picking up every flowery scent, sweet, bitter, rancid. A rancid stench. He slowed. Longtooth hissed at him for interrupting their feast. Covered in fur, the three of tree trunks, their long tails whipped back and forth, their formidable claws at ready. When had they come into his land? He couldn't recall. Light time was all the same, filled with hunting, killing, eating, resting. All right, so Crunchy with Ketchup. Also edited by Carol Hightshoe at Westenra Publications. Fun little dragon story. And there are several dragon anthologies currently out, so you might want to take a look if you really like dragons. So I wrote a story in here called Dancing with Thunder, and I based it on Chinese mythology. And humans think us lucky, the serpentine dragon scoffed as she sailed through the heavy gray clouds. Around her lightning flashed, leaving a strong scent, followed by crushing thunder, and frozen pellets fell. No doubt they destroy precious crops and shatter fragile roots. Some damage should concern her, and no doubt her mother was, even now, scurrying about their hunt, closing the shutters, and putting down pots and pans to catch the dripping water. Then she'd wrap inside her tattered cloak and sit by the fire, warming her thin body. How much better to be in her dragon form, free to indulge in the winds, diving up, down, above the annoying freezing rain. She felt free. She whirled, delighted how her green and red markings twirled, her scales glittering in the fading light. Too bad she couldn't stay like this forever. Her mother had often warned her, since she'd been a little girl, not to stay too long in her splendid form, some imagined danger of not ever being able to become human again. She knew her mother's words not to be true, because she stayed out one night playing among the stars and returned to her frail body at the sun's first light. The experience had convinced her she should be a dragon all the time. Flashes zipped around her like the fireworks the elder indulged in at the beginning of each new year. The people crowded the streets of their small village, and others snaked through wearing a dragon skin, writhing along as if they had the right to such a mighty beast. She found their arrogance and representation insulting. Her amazing form decorated with feathery appendages along her spine and around her almost feline face. Her large golden eyes far more than her human form, and her sharp teeth sat in perfect rows inside her huge mouth. While her human arms proved useful for doing the many chores her mother gave her, she had none and relished having only to turn to go where she wished. Zia, her mother called in her mind. Enough dragon time. Time to come home. No! She never had enough dragon time. If she were a bad daughter, she would refuse. Yet she could not disobey her mother. All right, I have another story in Dragon's Hoard 3 There's also 1 and 2, which I would encourage you to take a look at. And I have a story in this one as well, so give me just a sec here while I look it up. This one's called The Hatchling. And all the characters in here are actually not really human. Mama's hoard is gone. Humans came with their exploding weapons and sharp sticks, jabbing Mama, making her scream. They forced her out into the cold night, and they brought their loud machines with choking smoke, loading them up and driving them away. Gone now. The golden goblets taken from a king, the shields of soldiers who had come to slay Mama, the pretty chairs I liked to play in, and much, much more. When it got quiet, I dared to peek out from behind the rock cleft where Mama had hidden me. She told me not to come out until the human monsters had left, otherwise they'd steal me and sell me to something called a traveling circus. The black cave floor, always covered with Mama's treasure, looked barren, empty like my growling stomach. Watching the damaged entrance in case the intruders returned, I crept to the spot where Mama always left a fat hare. Nothing. No food. No Mama either. Mama, who kept me warm at night as I slept under her wing, away from the cold drifting inside. I shivered, cold, afraid, alone. Dragon dead, the were-tiger male informed Mira. How long? Mira asked. She stayed in her human form and finished climbing the rise. Below, in the valley surrounded by volcanic rock, rested a dragon's body. The head and wings had been brutally severed off. Blood soaked into the ground and would soon attract scavengers. Hatchling smell, Arlen informed her. Unless she shifted, she wouldn't be able to smell the baby dragon. Can you tell if they took it? No. He lifted his head, his black nose sniffing the air. Humans, he growled. His golden eyes watched her as she made her way down the steep side. We'll track. She followed, feeling vulnerable. If they needed to fight, it would take a few minutes before she could shift and join her mate in battle. His white cloak, striped with volcanic-colored stripes, helped Arlen blend into the rock. He sniffed every crack, small opening, or any other place they might find a young dragon hiding. As the sun rose, they discovered a path leading to a narrow valley. Miro gasped at the damage the humans had done. Deep ruts in the once grass-covered ground, yellow flowers, a favorite of dragons, crushed. Her eyes traveled to the cave. Broken rocks littered the ground. They'd used weapons to widen the entrance, leaving a gaping scar. Humans. Arlen snarled, disgusted. Greedy ones. Had they found the hatchling and taken it as well? Not so. Arlen crouched down, his long tail flipping. Hatchling. One of the rocks moved. She could barely see it. We're in time. Slowly Mira approached, kneeling to see the creature more clearly. Its scales were dazzling blue. Hints of silver graced the ridges. Poor thing, she cooed. I won't hurt you. She reached out for the hatchling. The hatchling shivered. Gently she gathered the dragon under her cloak, holding it close to her heart. She felt the baby stiffen, then slowly relax. Its eyes had opened and she was curious what color they might be. Golden eyes stared at her before they closed. Arlen sniffed the dragon. Female. A female dragon in human hands would have been a disaster. And the last one, Borne in Blood, again by Carol Hightshoe. Also has one of my stories in it. And the name of the story is The Price. Now, it is part of my Borders 5 Systems universe. which you're going to be hearing a lot more about. Because in another recording, I'm going to be reading from my new book. So, here's a short reading from The Price. Heart pounding, gasping for breath, Kara lifted her shaking hand, wondering why she hesitated before knocking 3 times. She paused before rapping 3 more times, glancing nervously behind her. For several terrified metras, she feared no one would answer. Maybe she'd use the incorrect code. The door creaked open, revealing a girl with long dark hair, eyes the color of the sea Kara had only heard stories about. You seek safety? Her green dress shimmered in the breeze. Yes, she managed, unsure if the girl would allow her inside. The other motioned Kara to enter. Come. Turning to go down a narrow hallway, she ordered, Follow me. Thank you. Her eyes drifted to the opening, revealing cushioned seats with several potential customers waiting. The second floor provided the living for the entire house. Another opening gave Kara a look at the busy kitchen, bustling with cooks and servers. Pots boiled and enticing smells reached her nose. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her she hadn't eaten all day. Wait here. The girl pulled aside a gauzy curtain. Alone, she examined the small room, a desk with barely room for one person perched on the stone floor, and another chair sat before it. Trembling, Kara eased into the other chair, trying to still her hands on her coarse skirt. What if no help was given? Many had told her to come here. The owner helped anyone who came. What if, because of whom her pursuers were, she got turned over to them? What if she had to continue hiding on the dangerous streets, easy prey for those who would betray her for the reward offered? You seek help. Kira started. She hadn't heard the Charon enter, a furred head of white with black stripes, tucked into a flowing gown of glittering gold with the dark eyes of a predator. Unwillingly, she gazed at the sharp claws, knowing they'd been made to kill. The tail tip, peeking from under the fabric, seemed to be out of place, and she barely controlled her laugh. Yes, she squeaked. All who come here are offered aid, the large feline reassured Kara. A slow blink. Tell me. Oh, she swallowed. You may not want to help me once I tell you who's after me. A slow blink. Tell me. I'm in much trouble, she blurted out. Nervously, she pushed back her dirty black hair. A paw she knew she should be afraid of lightly touched her shoulder. You are in no danger here. Not wanting to tell her whole story, Kira took a deep breath. The Archon's hunters and... She had to force the words out. The vampires. All right, so that is all from the various anthologies that have come out in the past few years that I have stories in. Do feel free to look them up on Amazon. There are some excellent stories in all of them. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for listening.